get started. Welcome to the second project manual roundtable session. Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who are attending for the first time, my name is Tracy Clark, and I am the project accounts manager for HMFH Architects and one of the co-chairs. And joining me is Patty Antreri, who is principal with Cambridge 7 Associates. Today's topic is strategies in developing fees, and we look forward to discussing the components and details informing the overall project fee. Just a couple of things before we get started. If you are able to do so, please turn on your video so we can see who is here. It's always nice to see everybody's faces and who's joining us today. This is not a presentation, so we encourage everybody to participate. Please feel free to ask questions as well as discuss your experiences. And if you're speaking for the first time today, please introduce yourself. It gives everybody a chance to learn more about you. I think that is it. We seem to have a few things covered. So Patty, if you could begin with the discussion.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Patty from Cambridge 7. Thanks for showing up again today for the second meeting. And I think, we at the end of the last meeting, we had collected, or we had asked people for topics. And I think I may have misinterpreted what people wanted to talk about in terms of the strategies for fees. I think that I was thinking of it at a more elemental level, and I think after a little bit of clarification with the person that had brought it up, it was more about how do you not lose a job because of the fee. So just because I wanted to start from the beginning to make sure we all did things the same way, I wanted to share my screen about basically a sample of how we build fees, at least how I build fees, and then everybody else can chime in about how they do it differently. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just share my screen here. And so as a result, I'm probably going to be looking away from you at the moment, so I apologize for that. And also feel free to jump in here. I think the topic I really just wanted to cover is, basic fee assumptions, because I think developing a fee is both an art and a science. And this is the science piece that I'm covering, but the art piece is something that has to be nudged within your own firm and based on your understanding. But typically what we do is we take the area of a project at a very high level. We estimate the cost per square foot. We estimate the overall construction cost here. And then, you assign a fee percentage to it. Now, this is more or less where the art of this comes in. Depending on what building type it is, it's, that percentage will range. And then if you're in a competitive environment, you probably want to, that's where the art piece comes in. It's just, how much can you afford to do the job for and still win it. And then this basically gets you a total fee. And then, we then put it into, then the other art part of this is what is considered basic services and what's considered below the line of specialty services. So, there's the architectural fee, and, let's just say we try and target 60%. MEP fees could be about 20 or, 22%, depending on the building type. Structural, then we have civil, specs we include, and code we include. And that really also depends on how your firm operates. Sometimes, sometimes cost estimating is in there. There's landscape lighting, acoustic, and other specialty consultants that, for the purposes of this exercise, I've just not included them, but it depends on the project. Then the other way, and then this has been tried and true with the AIA for a long time. Traditionally, 15% schematic, 20 design development, construction documents, and construction administration. Although what we're finding, and it would be interesting to find out what your experiences are, is that construction administration is for us is running close to 40% of the job, as opposed to what it used to be, which was about 25%. And so as a result, more money has to be spent in construction administration in order to not lose your shirts as the job is finishing. But the piece that I wanted to just talk about, and this goes back to the question of how do you how do you win a job in a competitive environment? And I think it depends on, there's the issue here has to do with the multiplier on the job, right? And every firm is going to have a different multiplier, but let's say your direct billing rate is $75. If you need to know what your break-even multiplier is. Let's just say your break-even multiplier was 2.5, right? Then that means your hourly rates would go down, and that would not cover profit, presumably. So let's just, for the talking purposes, say that your billable rate is three times your hourly. So noodling with those numbers is a way to manage your fees if you're in a competitive environment. I don't know if anybody else has any ideas about that. And this is where I was saying that you need to know that information, and then you have to have, and in our case, we want to make sure that our leadership is on board with any fee reductions we're taking and what the impact is going to be on the hourly rates. So, you can see here, if you go by the phases in the traditional phase at 15% of the total fee, if you at a 3.0 multiplier, you can see that you're spending more than that's available for schematic design. So I just did this so you could see, this is a staffing chart, 16 hours for a principal, 40 hours for three staff members, including a project architect. So, everybody builds it differently. The other thing I like to do is the percent of the fee that we're actually spending with the percentage for each phase, so that I know when we're going to be over. And you can see this is based on the traditional, where 40% goes to construction documents as opposed to 40% going to construction administration. So anyway, this is kind of my overview of how I do this. And so I know that everybody's got their own way of doing this, but I wanted to just share that with you, and ask if I think that's a good stopping point for me. And I'm happy to look at this chart any way you want to look at it, but maybe we can just start by asking, is this everyone else's experience of these, of the way fees are being broken down these days, with construction administration being as high as it is? Okay, this is what happened last time. How come you're all muted? I'm gonna unmute everyone. Okay, well, see what happened the last time is that when no one talked, then I had to call on people. Oh,
Patty?
Jean, yes, hi.
Laura,
Hi.
how you doing?
Oh, where are you, Laura? Are you an HMFH guest?
Yeah, there are about 3 others here with me, so there's 4 of us listening in. This is good. This is kind of similar. We do some different things, but yeah, the 40%. I think Trace, you would do 40% for CA, right?
Sorry, I missed it.
Maybe Trace can't hear me right now. I was going to ask about how do you keep good historic data on your past projects so that you have the information on how much you actually spend in each phase, and information on past projects in terms of what how they've done at different percentage fees? Do you have any database on that? This all kind of,
Yeah, we do keep
recollection.
we do keep track, and if you remember Doug Lawton, who was in our office, and I did make this joke the last time we were together, is that in the old days, we used to be able to count sheets and then divide the number of hours by the sheets to come up with an hours per sheet metric. And we did go back and do that historically for many projects, but that was in the days when people were really drafting and they couldn't just cut up a drawing and make 15 sheets out of one sheet. So I didn't go there, but yes, we do have that historical data that's available to us. If you know anything about Cambridge 7's practice, which I know that you do, is that we rarely have 2 projects that are exactly the same. So for us, the whole thing is an art. But if you've got like the Four Seasons Dalton that we did, that was a new build, even though the type of project was the same, but we're doing the same thing down in New Orleans, but that's a renovation of a tower. So it's a hard thing to make an apple to an apple for us in particular, but I think probably other people use that basis. Like aquariums are.
We're almost the exact. I was just going to say we're almost the exact opposite, because we do so much within so many projects within one market.
Right.
And even though every project is different and unique, we at least have some good historical data on hours it took to complete a project of the same square footage, or hours. We try and keep track of hours in each phase by project. So then we know what the square footage is. We know whether it was renovation or new. We know whether it's if there was phasing involved. So nothing is ever quite the same, but at least it can get us closer to putting a percentage on
Yes.
what worked and what didn't work. Yeah.
No, I can definitely see that. I mean, for aquarium, for a new build in an aquarium, we have that historical data. We do know that. But as I also mentioned the last time, the New England Aquarium in 1962 had 17 drawings, and somebody on the call had done a tea station with 18 drawings. So there you go. The hours per sheet are high.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Those days
Yeah.
are gone.
So Patty, this is Bobby from HMFH. Just to add a little bit of how we do our fees. We have what's called a top-down fee and then a bottom-up fee. So we do basically build them exactly like you're saying with the direct billing multiplier. But initially with the top-down fee, we're able just to put the estimated construction cost, and then we type in what we want our targeted fee to be, if that's the 10% or whatever, and that will tell us what our DLBM needs to be. It'll assume a 60-40 split. And then we go from there, we go and we work through our fee by adding all of the principals, all the staff, and we see what we come out to be and see, where our targeted fee was. how close we are based on what we initially do. So we have an initial comparison that just as a gut check to say, wow, we're either way over on this fee or we have a lot of room to move because we're way under our target fee based on how we think we can do the project. And like Laura was saying, we do keep a lot of historic information, so we kind of have a general sense, but that's kind of our initial approach, is this top down versus bottom up to kind of.
So are you saying that you do the top part of this first, the assumptions, and you put your consultants in, and then so this is basically the top, the sort of the top down, and then this is the labor estimate, right? Is this the same way that you do it?
Yes, pretty much. That's
Yeah, and then when you do them separately, it allows you to kind of see those two numbers and see if what you were thinking about what it actually is going to take to do this job versus what that percentage guess was going to be.
exactly.
See if those marry, if those make sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So-
yeah, that's definitely something that we've done. I think the other thing that allows, that when you do the bottom up fee, you can also factor in other factors, like sometimes clients are different clients and they have serious hand holding that needs to happen, or there's going to be twice as many meetings, or there's going to be this. And so that kind of, you can build that into the bottom up fee, knowing that this is what it's going to take. And then of course you have to reconcile when you get to the comparing those two numbers.
Or maybe you just lose the job because
you
don't want it anymore.
you realize that
Exactly.
you when you factor in the headache factor, the client factor.
Exactly. You know too much at that point.
Yeah. We've lost jobs because we knew too much.
That's right.
That is a problem.
So I have a question. This is Jean Roberts from Ellenswag. We also do top down and bottom up, and they never seem to work out. But one of the biggest problems we're finding these days, I guess it's two problems. One is that the clients are starting to request so many additional consultants, which in the old days were additional service consultants, and now they're plopping them into the fee and then saying, this is your max fee that you can get, but we've got all these other consultants. And the second thing is that we're finding that our engineers, especially our MEP, are getting, they want more. And they're coming in, we ask them for a fee, they come in way high. And you're showing 60% architecture. And it's like, when we put all these fees together, we realize that we're getting less than, the total of all these guys.
Yeah. So these guys probably want 30, right? And then this fee goes down.
Yeah, and then you add the other consultants in, you've got like so little fee left, and you can't do this. You're managing everybody, and you have to go back to everyone and say, either be hard-nosed and say, this is the fee that you're going to get, or can you please cut it by 10% and see where we can get? What are people doing these days with their consultants? Or are they coming in from the beginning and saying, Bob, you're gonna, if you want this job, you need to be at this number?
Yeah, well, I know at HMFH, because we do a lot of MSBA work, if you're, the feasibility schematic design fees are always really low. So we're always almost losing money. It's a loss leader, just assuming that and hoping that the project's going to move forward, and then you can negotiate a higher fee at that point. And you talk to the consultant and say, hey, we'll help you get back to normal at this point. But we're in the same boat where we're constantly going back and saying, hey, but this is where our historical data comes in. We kind of go back and say, hey, we just did a project with you and you were only 25% here. Why is this project so much more complicated? And try to make them tell us why their fee went up by a certain percentage for this project and why they see it as more complicated than the other school that they did it for us. So I think that historical data helps a lot. But again, like you have to have a lot of similar projects to be able to compare to and use a lot of the same consultants all the time.
Yeah. Well, we had a quote unquote COVID discount for the past year that we finally have stopped doing, which was basically a break-even multiplier. But that's not a way to run a business. I think in the past, first of all, it always helps to negotiate the fee after you've won the job, right? If you have the job, it's easier to tell somebody this is what your fee is. right? I don't know. Do people shop consultants?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've done that as well.
I was going to say the other thing with consultants that we've done too is, and I'm sorry, my camera's off, but this is Peter Kleiner, Short Silver.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm gonna
done-
stop sharing.
I've done a number of different fee calculators, and it's good to see, Patty, that yours looks like 5 others we've developed independently. Like everyone has their own sort of different version of the same thing.
Well, we have 10 versions here at the office, so I'm glad
what I
that
was gonna
all of you are the same as me.
What I was going to say about consultants, we've been doing, and I sort of baked this into a sort of a bottom-up fee, is that if you have their fees and you basically assume that like their work, if you were just to charge an additional service, you would charge a markup on it because you're managing their fee,
Right.
but you're also managing their time. So I've been breaking out sort of what basically saying 20% of whatever the consultant's fee, that is management time, and building that as into the fee is something separate. And then when we get the fees from the consultants, it's sort of like, well, that's in a bottom-up version. Yeah, fine. If the client accepts a higher fee from them, great. That just adds to your management time for that, and including all those additional consultants. So you argue, we need a lighting designer, we need an acoustician. Our fee just went up 20% of their fee because we're managing and coordinating their work.
Right.
And so sometimes that works. Sometimes you're just chewing your arm because your fee didn't go up and you're just allocating the hours, but you're at least building that sort of structure in, because you can't add all those additional consultants from basic services without an additional hours that you're spending on the project, and whether it's just the complexity and the care of the project. And I have another question. I'm sorry, I was a little bit late, but the hours that we've acknowledged that CA takes longer, is there a sense that we've done it both ways, and a lot of times we sort of just treat it as profit fade in the project. So that's sort of like, yeah, great, but I'll take the money and then fade it out and walk the tightrope of, do I want the money now? Do I want the money later? And I guess that's something that I think that's sort of an internal management thing, as long as you're getting the main fee. as long as you're getting the whole fee, it all kind of washes out in the books. But it's sort of like it also is sort of those risks of when projects don't go through construction, or sometimes I think the contractors are our friend in getting clients used to additional services and additional money, and we oftentimes have better luck requesting additional services when the contractor is justifying that as well. That this is more money in CA. So the costs add up in CA as long as if you can get there and you can get additional services then.
Yeah. So do you have a way of, when we manage, well, when we keep historical data, we keep it on per phase, so that we can tell how much we're actually spending, because I don't know. I think if my CFO were here, he would not like us talking about profit fade. He hates that. So hello, nice to see you. This is who?
It's Peter Kleiner with Short Silver. Yeah, no, and I think that's something that I would agree. We don't like sort of not knowing where the project's going to end up and sort of say like, oh well, the profit's profitable, awesome, great, but you under budgeted. The later phase is wonderful. Like it's
yeah. When you're talking about profit phase, you're watching this thing go from 3.0 to 3.9 to 3.8 to 3.7, and then you find your break even at whatever it is. So that's not great. So in some ways, I've managed projects in the Middle East as well. We've done a lot of work there, and they are set up a little bit more along the lines of the British system, and so CA oftentimes is, first of all, it's a separate fee altogether. It doesn't include design, which is smart, because that fee tends to be, because of construction, how construction works in that part of the world, that fee tends to be the same, if not more, than the design fees, because there's entire teams on site managing that construction. But in that case, we have 11 people down in New Orleans right now. So, you know, that's a big part of the office, doing construction administration. So, yeah, we don't like profit fade, to be honest with you, but
Yeah.
I think
So I was going to say another exercise that we've done in our office. I've done a number of federal projects, and the federal submittals, the fee proposals we put together is a different mindset, particularly with the Brooks Act, which limits design service fees at 6%. But it's so those are included costs in your fee, but they're the excluded costs that are delineated, and that allows, if you look at just the Brooks Act and sort of how they talk about fee, it's a good discussion point for everybody else, because basically it says this is what it costs to design and actually produce documents for a building. And here's the stuff that's sort of extraneous to that effort. And it includes, and so things that are extraneous are all the meetings, all sort of the analysis stuff, all sort of the modeling, energy stuff. And so that's in addition to the 6%. So you can develop a fee build differently for that. And relative to construction, going back to that, the federal government, that's outside the Brooks Act. So there's actually very little fee for construction. So you do a construction build based on the schedule and actually an amount of time. So the construction fee that I do for federal projects is all bottom up. So it's all like, so it has no relation to percentage sometimes, because if it's a 5-year construction duration and you have meetings every week, yeah, 24% ain't gonna cut it. It doesn't, I don't care what project it is. It's just the durations are too long. So that's another way we've done fee builds, and the federal forms are a pain, and it's a pain in the process to get into, but it's actually a good discipline and an alternate way of thinking about fee builds.
I'll have to look into that. I didn't, I wasn't aware of that.
This is Drake Jacobs, Group 1. In the past, I've done a lot of healthcare work, and for very large projects, what we've done during the contract negotiation phase is to basically do a work plan where we actually try to identify the work products we're going to have to develop, who's going to do them, and then somewhat along the lines of that classic model you mentioned earlier of using number of sheets. So we have done it where we identify those sheets because we know the amount of information that has to go in, and we know which ones have to be at a certain scale. So we're able to actually develop a work plan by phase and with the work products identified. And when I do it, I try to identify the staffing that I'll need, what level of experience they need, so that I can get into considerable, getting into the weeds for a bottom up can be very time consuming. But if you want to make sure you're not getting killed, you try to ferret out, identify what information is not provided by the owner, that your previous experience has given you some insight into, whether they're going to need you to do certain things like equipment. Is that going to be a separate consultant, or is that going to be on you? But by identifying all of the tasks, I mean, including things like we know the duration of each of the phases, or we make assumptions to that, we spell them out. But then what we do is what I do is I identify X number of meetings per week, and I plug that into my spreadsheet, and I build the number up. And when I look at the number, I go back and I think, have I overdone it? Have I missed something? So I've got scheduled meetings in-house, scheduled meetings out-house, scheduled meetings with our consultants, schedule meetings with the owner's consultant.
So Drake, if I could just interrupt for a second. So do you not, so then how do you know overall if you're right? I mean, do you do it top down? Do you have,
Yes, we
like,
do.
how do you get your arms around it?
You're absolutely
besides
right.
counting the beans?
You're absolutely right. So it's got to be, as Peter said, you've got to do a top down. That's your first pass. And now you got to test that number to see what's not in that number or what is too much in that number. And a lot of that depends on, is it a project type that you have considerable experience with, or is it something that you have only a little experience with? And so your experience is going to be your gut. So that's where you got to start. And then you look at the big market as well, because you know that if the client is doing an open invitation for proposals, you don't know who you're going to be up against. If the client has got a selected list, sometimes they'll tell you that they're talking to X, Y, and Z competitors. And so to the extent that you can get information from the client, you need to know what your market is, who your competitors are. That'll be your reality check from the top side down. I remember a story many years ago where TAC was, we all know TAC. TAC was struggling, and I remember I was working at Moshe Softy's office, and TAC had put in a proposal on a project. Their fee as a percent of the estimated budget was like 1.78%. There's not a person that in this group right now that would ever consider such a fee. But they did the project, they lost their shirt, and they ended up out of business. But we're all sitting in a room wondering, where were they coming from? And a top down and a look at what your competitors are doing, what your competitors are doing is really an important part of the mix. So the way you've set it up is exactly the way I would set it up for the top down. The bottom up, there's two strategies. One is you do it sort of cosmically, and depending on the sensitivity of the project and the scheduling and so forth, you may get into the middle ground where I was just describing, getting into considerable level of detail. So that's my thought on this, on that.
Yeah, thank you. You know, the one thing that's, the one thing that I have found, and I don't know if other people have found it, but since you mentioned this, Drake, is the schedule. You can pretty much weather any amount of fee within a certain phase, but if the schedule slips, it's really the time that starts to make you lose the money in these phases, is because if you can keep the project on schedule, then you tend to not have these sort of, what did you call them? Oh, profit fades. I love that, Peter. I'm going to have to now use that term. That to me is what makes it more than actually what they're doing in that particular task, is how long it takes them. And, anyway, so.
There's another schedule profit fade that if you don't build it in from the bottom up, and this is something that I've started doing more generally with projects. So contractors look at escalation. When you're budgeting your fee at the beginning of the job, and your CA is 3-4 years out, and escalation's at 3% of the year, you've under budgeted, because you can't support future wages at what you're giving. So that's something that to consider, and that's something, if you could put it in the schedule, that's how your fees are based on, is includes an assumed escalation.
That's a great idea. Does that work? Do they usually they want you to hold your rates for 4 years, and
so again, this was a discipline I learned, because some of the federal worksheets have it, and I think they expect people not to use it. But if you use it and you tie it to the schedule that's submitted, you can justify that escalation cost to the midpoint of each phase. And so when the schedule slips or changes, every little bit helps.
yes.
But
I love that, though. It's worth thinking about. I'm gonna have to look at this Brooks Act because, you've made me think now, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but what exactly is the AIA doing if the federal government has its own way of calculating fees? And the AIA has their own contracts and they're sitting in, anyway, that's me meandering about.
Well, well, another, you talk about the AIA, but there's also, I'm going to find this resource. I have it somewhere. And if I can, Patty, I think I have your email. So I'll email it to you and maybe you could text it to the group next time.
Okay.
But the Canadian Institute of Architecture years ago, I don't know if the document's online, they came up with a fee, how to calculate fees for a project. So it has different types of project, what the complexity level is, and what the architectural fees, what the architectural and engineering fees should be based on the size and complexity of the project. Their numbers are higher than you can generally get, but it's still like, it's a great guide. But I think
Peter, I just put that in the chat window. A colleague of mine had recommended that as well, and I was kind of surprised that the AIA to have to refer to Canada's system.
And I think the issue comes to price fixing, and I think there's certain things in the United States that prevent this type of thing, even though some municipalities like DCAM has a price schedule, right? So and a fee schedule, but it's price fixing when it's done by the AIA.
I see.
You may remember that a number of years ago, when we were all much younger, the AIA was hauled up by the Justice Department and as basically colluding in anti-competitive practices. And we barely got out of that with the AIA intact. So price fixing is what they were looking at, and the schedules all disappeared. If you can find one in some bookstore somewhere, let me know. But I haven't seen one in 20 years or more.
My name is Kyle Worker. I'm from Merge Architects. I was going to ask how frequently people on this call are told by potential clients that they were too expensive. If this is just a tactic that's just thrown at us after the fact. Because we hear that a lot. And I think, I mean, what we've noticed as a trend is like, no one tells us what their budget is when we're proposing a fee. And often there has been like little to no programming done on the client side. And that is sort of assumed as part of the basic services without, being called out. So we're often asked to propose on projects where there's no clear budget and also no clear scope.
But you're too expensive.
Sorry?
And then you're too expensive.
And then we're too expensive. So I think we often kind of bend over backwards in our proposals to explain that we need to do an intensive feasibility study at the outset, often say that we would want to work hourly to define the scope further before agreeing to a fee. And then only kind of in duress do we state a fee that we often are saying it would be a percentage, like you can think about it as a percentage of whatever your budget is, which could be the following. And no matter how many ways we qualify it, we still get this feedback of, your fee was too high, which is infuriating. So I'm just curious what others do in those kind of situations.
Like basically, we lose the job, right?
Yeah, we've definitely gotten that response from, submitting a fee with a proposal and finding out we're too expensive or we came in just higher than the next guy or whatever. And sometimes I wonder if it's like a way to like say, okay, can you come down? Or, like then they just got us pit against each other. But I think what you kind of said there is kind of what I've done in reaction to that is that I've built in, I show things like, here's what, this is your total project cost, here's an assumed FF&E cost, here's an assumed soft cost, here's an assumed this, and then just say, like, this is all based on assumptions. We need to get to know you more, need to learn more about your project and more about you guys, and try to qualify. Like you said, it's essentially the same thing you are doing. But I've been finding that that's been what we do, just to be able to feel a little bit more like we're not tied to this number necessarily if you change everything on us or surprise us with a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. I think this is probably a good discussion. My reaction to it is that's the justification for not giving us a job, but that's not the reason. It's easy to tell someone they lost the job because the fee was too high.
Yeah.
We get this reaction, we get debriefs from everybody, and it's like Rashomon. If you talk to enough people, like, well, this firm did this and they won it because of this, and you talk to someone else, like, well, that firm didn't do that at all. And we heard our fee was too high. It's like the fee that the firm that was hired had the exact same fee. Like it's so I take that with a grain of salt. And I think yes, justifying and building in things that allow for open negotiation are good. But I think if you believe in your fee, it probably wasn't too far off, and it wasn't the fee that lost the job.
Maybe
You
a
have to know
follow-up
your
question.
client.
Oh, sorry, Drake, go ahead.
You have to know your client. If you're working with a developer, for example, and you've never worked with this particular firm, you got to do a lot of homework to find out who they are, what they're after, how they work. And most of them have a reputation of one sort or another. Trying to find that information out, sometimes it's better just to walk. And I've done that on projects. It's just not worth agonizing over. If he says your fee is too high and he's not giving you information, that's kind of a warning signal. You don't want to find yourself in a position where you promised to do something, which is your contract, and then you find that the assumptions you predicated that on are not supported by what they're now demanding. So you've got to get something from them in writing. And if you can't get it from the writing, God bless us, just walk away from it.
I was going to say earlier, Patty, I liked how you said when you got to your part in the spreadsheet about the cost per square foot, you said this part is kind of an art, which I think we often feel that way because, especially with the inflation of the last year, it's felt like really throwing darts when we're putting that square footage number in.
Oh,
so I think
totally.
to what Bobby was saying earlier, we do the top down on one sheet, the bottom up on another, and then I think kind of like what Paul was alluding to, it's like this dance back and forth between the two. It kind of have them meet in the middle. I think like Gene said, like we're often high on the bottom up. And so I think we sort of put out a cost per square foot. And then after doing that, we sort of like hone it. But it feels totally arbitrary because, we're just not experts in costing. So I was curious if others are deriving that with more confidence from like historical data, or if people are reaching out to contractors for favors, or, going to things like RS means or similar aggregators.
I don't know, because, you look at the price of wood and all of a sudden, it was outrageously expensive, and now it's coming back down again. But it's hard to stay on top of all of that. And so, this is an interesting discussion because when I do work in the Middle East, because the construction costs over there are so out of whack from what we would do here, is that you really have to base those, in my opinion, those fees on what it actually takes you to do the job. So in those cases, you really have to rely on the bottom up. And I don't know how many people on this call have access to your overhead multiplier that you actually can pinpoint, okay, I need to make $1.60 for every dollar that I bring in order to just break even to keep the lights on. So if you knew that that's where that's where and I don't know, Paul, if you do the same thing, where you can make the labor a little bit more fungible, if you will, right? Because you can say, okay, I'm only going to go for a 2.9 multiplier or a 3.0 as opposed to 3.8 or whatever your firm targets. Is that if you have access to that, that's where you can know when you're going to, go down the drain.
I've also done with international work, working in China recently. I've been kind of translating it. Oh, I'm sorry, the pun, to like US dollars. Like, so I'm just kind of like, because I was told recently by a potential client that they were going to build a portion of a project for 2,000 RMB per square meter. And I'm just like, okay, so I just did the math and I'm like, all right, so then our fee would kind of work out like this. And then I realized that 2,000 RMB per square meter is equivalent to $30 a square foot, which is not typically what I build a fee on.
No, that's why you really can't do it.
So I essentially just made a separate little chunk of the spreadsheet that just drew it all up. Is what I would, if it was happening right like down the street in Boston and we were going to do it, this is what it would cost us to design it. In theory, it's no matter what they build it for, probably a lot less. It doesn't mean I'm going to design it for a lot less. So,
Right.
There's a certain amount of that has to happen, I think. But there was something else I was going to say. I forget. I'll chime in again when I think of it.
One thing to add to the mix is our assumptions are predicated on a certain static set of conditions. For example, the building code. I don't know how many of you have embarked on a project and then in the middle of the project, there's a code change and the code change, you are subject to that code change because you're too far away from completing the job to do it under the current code. So why that becomes an issue, and I think this affects our MEP guys, and Patty, you had mentioned that the fees for the MEP guys are moving upward as a percentage. A lot of that is comes out of the energy code that we are now working with. It demands a lot more of us architecturally in terms of detailing, but it also is requiring a lot more input from the engineers. So factoring that in, does that really work against the cost of construction we're used to? I'm having a hard time differentiating that.
Those are good points.
Kyle, just to go back to your question about square footage cost, we rely a lot on our cost estimator. Early on in the project, we'll give them a call and say, hey, can you give us the cost per square foot of the schools right now? A lot of times we're doing feasibility studies and we're trying to put together quick budgets for what their projects are going to cost. And then we have to kind of come up with an estimated fee for that. So using our cost estimator, he never charges us because we use them all the time, but he'll give him a little napkin sketch and he'll be able to kind of give us a cost per square foot that we rely on.
To that point, I was going to say this, that response to Kyle's comment about square footage cost was that I think to some degree it depends on the client. To some, sometimes you have a sophisticated client that knows what a square footage cost means. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes we have new museum clients that are literally like a group of people just coming together because they want to make a museum and they have never built anything ever before. And so I've started including a paragraph that essentially explains that projects can range in cost per square foot and what you're going to get for this many, just to kind of not necessarily like try and detail out what you get for $300 a square foot, but to kind of explain that you can have ranges and we're going to assume that this is going to be in this area. And if it's not, then we can negotiate and talk to you about where does it really want to fall? Again, it's like one of those qualifiers that we're, talking about. But I feel like sometimes we have to be the educators. We have to educate our clients a little bit because some of them, I think, don't know. And you don't want to necessarily assume they know something.
Well, we have just a few minutes left before we are going to be wrapping up. Thank you, everybody who had spoken. So I just want to try to make sure that anybody who has not had a chance to speak, if you'd like to say anything, please feel free.
Also, I thought this was a good discussion that could probably go on. Tracy had sent out a list of other topics that people might have wanted to have seen. And if you're new to this meeting and you want to, and you want to keep going, maybe you could just put your emails in the chat if you haven't attended before, because we had a list from the last time we met, and a list of topics. So there are other topics you guys want to also think about while we're chatting?
Yeah, if you don't know right offhand, you feel free to put those in the chat room as well. We're collecting all the topics. And as Patty mentioned, we did start a BSA project management roundtable email group. So if you're interested in joining that, please feel free to put your email in the chat and we'll keep that going. We have some really great topics. So again, if you're interested in finding out what those are, I'm happy to email those to you as well. And we're hoping, because we're trying to hold these every other month right now, especially, while offices are still opening. So the next meeting would probably be in August. So we'll make sure to send out reminders and keep everybody updated. But we're thinking about the next meeting to be something along the line of project finances, maybe billings, any software that you use. Try to get some ideas on that. So I'd be curious to see if anybody has any priorities they want to discuss on that as well. So if anybody has anything else they want to add to this, please feel free. Again, it was great seeing some new faces as well as some of the people that attended last time. And we had a pretty good turnout.
Tracy, one of the things that came up this week is the use of Dell Tech as a project management tool. So how many folks in this group are doing that?
Are you talking about the Dell Tech Vision?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, we have not tried it in the last 2, I don't know, Paul, you and I got to be the best at the Dell Tech Vision software, but for us here at Cambridge 7, it was, I don't know whether it's left-brained or right-brained, but it didn't really make sense to any of us.
Yeah, we gave it a go, but it did not stick.
It didn't stick, and part of it is the way you have to input the fee. So, it's basically become a data entry person if you do it. So it was not. Hello, Laura.
Hi, I do use my Smith Group uses it. So I just joined in, my meeting got out. So I wanted to jump in at the end.
So you guys used it and it was successful, right?
Yeah, we still use it ongoing. Yep. For staffing and project finances.
Now, do all of your project managers do it, or does there just one person that does it?
Nope, we all do it. We're all responsible for our own plans.
Yeah, see, you have a much better behaved group than we have here at Cambridge 7. So
Precisely.
Sorry, our little social experiment doesn't allow for such.
Let me ask you a question. You said that you actually use it now and all of your managers use it. To set it up the first go around, do you basically do a pencil version or your own spreadsheet version and then you input the information?
Some people use it in different ways, but no, we typically, after we got trained and kind of learned how to use it, we jump right into putting our plan with our staff, into Vision and work with it and adjust it ongoing as the project moves forward. So we do use it to develop fees too.
That's what I was thinking too. Just going back, Tracy, to your question about topics, I think in your list is the CA phase as as an issue to be discussed. And I think both Peter and Paul had alluded to the roller coaster of the CA phase.
Hi, I'm just gonna jump in here and share my screen.
Oh, thank you.
Because this is the one that had the list of topics here: role of the project manager, energy modeling, signage, managing client expectations, accounting software, that was in there. I don't see this, oh, the lessons learned, is that, I don't see the CA thing here that you're mentioning.
Well, maybe we should add it.
Okay.
The reason I'm saying that is that there are a lot of things we can do as managers that would improve the quality of our work, that at the beginning phase, when we're doing the documents, the quality of our documents affects in large measure what happens in CA. So for example, a recent conversation with contractors, I learned that as a rule of thumb, contractors figure it costs them $1,000 for each RFI they send out. So they don't really want, they may want to do that. They may want to use RFIs as a way of getting change orders. But if the RFIs aren't genuine, it means that we're not doing a good job on the front end. So that would be a conversation that we can have.
Oh, well, you're making an assumption that I don't find true these days, that contractors are actually looking at the drawings. Because
Patty, I'm sorry.
I don't know if you have a contractor that actually looks at the drawings, but if you could send me their contact info. I'm down.
It depends on the contractor. There are one or two of them, but they're rare.
I don't know.
I've
Okay.
had very good luck with Walsh Brothers. I don't want to.
No, Welsh Brothers, okay, maybe they look at the drawings. I don't think there's other contractors that look at drawings, but, and then of course, I think that actually there are contractors that calculate how many RFIs they need to make more money. And so they just then, there are those that will send you 300 before the drawings, before they've even looked at the drawings, so.
Patty, you're absolutely right. There's a classic story about Suffolk in the old days. They would send in an RFI. They wanted to know the mounting height of the call buttons for the elevators. There were 4 elevators and it was a 60-story building. So multiply the number of floors times the number of elevators, and each one was a separate RFI. So you're certainly right on the money there.
Well, maybe you should, the other thing they don't look at is corrected shop drawings while they're installing it in the field. So, you know, like, I don't know what's going on in the world anymore, but all right, I can see we're losing people. Who is Eric, by the way?
You love this group.
The session is also being recorded. So once we get the instructions from the BSA, they'll be putting it up hopefully next week. So I will send out a link as soon as I receive it, so that anybody who wants to review this again can.
Okay. Anyway, thank you, everybody. It was good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Next time.
Bill, did you want to stay on for a second?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, that
Went great.
yeah, that was productive. There were a few people that talked.
Yeah.
So that's nice. And yeah, Drake is the one that
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
he does go on a bit, and he's still living in the world where he thinks contractors look at
Let
drawings.
me see if I can.
Who was Eric?
I'm gonna